When I'm tracking in the studio, I'll typically run vocals through some EQ and compression on input, and then apply some additional EQ and compression later when mixing. This may sound like overkill, but I've always found that 2 stages of softer compression usually sounds better than 1 single stage of heavy compression. If I'm using EQ for recording, I'm just doing things like boosting the highs or maybe filtering out the lows, but then I save the mix EQ for more surgical EQ fixes and frequency balancing. So what if you're in a situation where you don't have any hardware to track with, but you want to process your recordings on input? Well, you can do this pretty simply with just an aux track in Logic's mixer in line with the audio track you're recording to. So from this point on, you're just going to hear my voice raw with no effects. I'm using an AKG C414 BULS as my dialogue mic, and this is just so I can demonstrate how the setup and signal chain works, and then I'll run Ashley's vocals from the previous video through this same signal chain and simulate a recording where she sang through these plugins and had those recordings printed into the session. So right now you can see I have a mono audio track on input 1, and that's just my mic going straight into input 1 on my interface. No fancy preamps, nothing like that, just a digital preamp on my interface. So what we can do is we're going to put an aux track in line with this before the audio track. So I'll just go up to Options, Create New Auxiliary Channel Strip, and I'll change the format on the aux track to mono, and then I'll make that input 1, which it already is. So right now, both the aux track and the audio track are picking up my voice from the mic. So what I'll do is I'll change the input on the audio track to a bus. So I'll just make this bus 4. I'll option click on the aux track to pull its fader up there. Also pull up the audio track as well. And what I'll do is I'll make the output of the aux track go over to bus 4. So what's happening is my audio interface is receiving signal on input 1. It's going into this aux track. Then at the output of the aux track, it's going to bus 4, which is going over to this audio track. So the thing that's kind of cool about aux tracks is they can receive audio signals just like an audio track, and you can't record anything to them, but they can still receive signal. The cool thing about them is they don't have to be armed or input monitored to pick up signal. They're always picking up signal. Now, the audio track is going to have to be input monitored for us to hear anything, and it's going to have to be armed for recording in order to record anything. But I can use the aux track to add effects and send the fully processed signal over to the audio track, essentially printing those effects in place on input. So let's start with an EQ. I'll just use the channel EQ, and I'll just pull up the high end of it, so we'll get a little bit more sibilance there, so it's a little bit brighter. I'll also filter out the low end quite a bit. I don't want any boomy sounds in there. Let's go ahead and give me a little bit of a 2K or 1K bump here just for diction. Let's throw it right about there. And I'll just bump up the low end just a touch. So there we go. And then let's add the optical compressor, the vintage opto circuit. Turn the auto gain off. So I'll just keep talking. Test 1, 2, check 1, 2, check 1, 2, check testing 1, 2, mic check 1, 2, check testing 1, 2. So I've got a bit of compression now. So this will help to lower down the louder dynamics on input and also help pull up the softer dynamics on input if I add a little bit of makeup gain to it. So keep in mind that the signal coming into this aux track is being processed by this EQ and this compressor, and then it's going over to the audio track. So if I arm this for recording and hit R to record, what this is going to do is it's going to record my voice with all of those effects that are coming from the aux track directly onto my new audio recording. So it's processing that EQ and compression on input. So this can certainly help when recording a singer. I've got some third-party compression. I've got an LA2A emulation here, the channel EQ, and a second stage of compression just to level out some other dynamics.
Now that it's over, don't tell me that it's over. Don't turn this ship around and tell me that you can't give one more day. Don't ever tell me why. Don't you ever tell me why. 'Cause I don't want to know.
So on top are the vocals that were processed on input. You can see the dynamics are nice and level. And these are the raw vocals without any effects. So one last thing I'll mention is that this is not standard procedure for DAW recording. This is a very specialized recording technique that should only be used if you absolutely want to commit to the effects you use on input. I've used this before to level out dynamics on input like I did here. I've used it before when I was doing a live stream and I had several microphones running through aux tracks with effects, and then I was sending a feed to the stream and then another feed to a hardware recorder. I was kind of using Logic like a live mixer in that situation. I was controlling levels and everything in real time. And I've even used this before with a singer that used heavy auto-tune as part of his sound. So I put auto-tune on the aux track, turned on low latency mode, and then recorded all of his takes with auto-tune printed right into the recording. So again, it's a very specialized technique, but it's pretty easy to do in Logic.